Acting on past conferred on him by the provisions of the APRC Constitution, has retired Ajande Jata as the APRC National Women's Mobilizer and Aja Fatuba as the APRC Deputy Women Mobilizer with immediate effect. A news release from the APRC Bureau reveals that His Excellency the President, National Chairman and Party Leader, Sheikh Professor Alhaji Dr. Yahya AJJ Jame, has in the same vein appointed Mrs. Aissatou Jifanga Jaju of Fonyi Jifanga Village, West Coast Region, National Women Mobilizer, and Mrs. Fatunjai Fofana of Somatown, Lower River Region, Deputy National Women Mobilizer with immediate effect. The immortal remains of His Grace Robert Solomon Tiliwa Johnson were Thursday laid at the Cathedral Church in Banjul, where the Book of Condolence was opened to mourners. That report by Samuel Ba, who joined hundreds of sympathizers and spoke to some visiting religious clerics on the demise of their colleague, will come later in the news bulletin. The West African Agricultural Productivity Program, WAP, in collaboration with the Horticulture Technical Services of the Department of Agriculture, recently concluded a 3-day training for the second batch of 50 horticulture farmers on nutrition and the value chain approach at the Genoa Agricultural Rural Farmers Training Center. The program is part of a 3-year action plan on gender mainstreaming in agriculture. Winifred Nicole has details.
Agricultural Productivity Program, WAP, in collaboration with the Horticulture Technical Services of the Department of Agriculture, recently concluded a 3-day training for second batch of 50 horticulture farmers on nutrition and the value chain approach at the Genoa Agricultural Rural Farmer Training Center. The training, which was mainly practical in scope, aims at improving participants' knowledge and skills on processing and preservation of fruits and vegetables. The tutorial forms part of a 3-year action plan on gender mainstreaming in agricultural development by the Department of Agriculture and WAP. Ami Fabure Damfa, who doubles as the Deputy Director of the Horticulture Technical Services of the Department of Agriculture and the WAP Gender Focal Person, revealed that the training, being the second of its kind, aims at mainstreaming gender for improved agricultural production and productivity. She further described vegetable processing as an important undertaking, given the associated losses incurred during peak periods. Welcoming participants, Lamin Sar, Senior Agricultural Officer at the Genoa Directorate, revealed that series of similar training have been conducted on production. The Senior Agric Officer saw the need for conducting such training to avert production losses in face of changing market trends. Sar further urged participants to share the knowledge gained. Knowledge, he said, is like an egg, and one cannot make use of it without breaking it. The Deputy Governor, Lower River Region, Abunjai, urged participants to share as much information and experience as possible. As representatives of their communities, Governor Njai challenged them to live up to expectations by disseminating information gathered from the tutorial. Deputy Governor Njai lauded government for continuously supporting farming ventures as demonstrated by the existence of numerous projects. Deputy Governor Njai described technology as dynamic and the need for periodic updating. He also commended the WAP project and the Horticulture Technical Services of the department for organizing the training with funding support from the World Bank. Reporting for GRTS News, I am Winifred Nicole Hadibat.
Time now to take our first break. We'll be back with news from outside the Gambia. Welcome back. In Venezuela, opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez has handed himself in following an arrest warrant for his arrest. President Nicolas Maduro has accused the opposition of plotting to overthrow the government following days of demonstrations in the capital Caracas, which left at least one person dead. As we hear in this report, President Maduro has called on his supporters to turn out for a rival demonstration and has expelled 2 U.S. diplomats.
Groups of opposition demonstrators clashed with security forces Wednesday night, throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails in the Altamira district of Caracas. They carried out lightning operations known as guarimbas, burning tires and garbage cans to block streets and cause chaos in the capital. Student protests have not weakened in Venezuela since the arrest of leader Leopoldo Lopez. President Maduro had accused him on television of seeking to overthrow the regime.
This fascist, Leopoldo Lopez, who we detain, is well guarded in prison. He will be accused of calling for a coup, and he should respond, and his accomplices for this coup and for each violent incident that happens in this country.
It was the Speaker of the National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, considered a rival of Maduro, who negotiated the surrender of the protest leader. He reportedly convinced him that his life would be in danger if he continued to stay underground. Leopoldo Lopez was transferred to a military prison officially for his own safety.
The fundamental idea of Mr. Lopez is not just to demonstrate his democratic rights, but also that there be due process, a trial with full guarantees.
Outside the courthouse, hundreds of people demonstrated against the arrest of Lopez. They say Nicolas Maduro has plunged the country into economic disaster and want his resignation.
We are unarmed. We are opposed to this disaster, but we aren't armed. What we do have is heart and soul to fight for our country.
On Tuesday, a 2-year-old local beauty queen who was demonstrating against the regime was shot in the head and died. She is the 4th victim of this current crisis, the most serious since the contested election of Maduro last year.
The death toll in the Ukrainian capital continues to rise as police and demonstrators clash for a second night, leaving 25 people dead. Both the opposition and the government accuse each other of starting the violence, which broke out at the main protest site, which has been occupied for almost 3 months. Ukraine is at the center of a tussle between an opposition aided and abetted by the West and government of President Yanukovych supported by Russia.
Fighting broke out in Kiev on Thursday, just hours after the Ukrainian president called a truce. Protesters pressed ahead, meeting fire from riot police, and retook control of Independence Square. The number of fatalities continues to mount. As many as 25 civilians were killed in Thursday's clashes. The government says that scores of police have been wounded. Since Tuesday, the death toll has risen to at least 50 civilians and 12 police officers.
I was standing next to a guy at the barricades. Someone fired from the Ukraine hotel and he fell down. His chest was covered in blood. We were evacuated and he was still breathing. He said, "Brothers, I don't want to die." 30 seconds later, he was dead.
The bloodshed this week in Ukraine's capital is the worst seen in the country's 22 years of independence. Emergency medical services have been set up in hotels off Independence Square. Medics say that many of the dead were killed by snipers.
The ones who are lucky through limbs, who are not lungs and heart, and they are unfortunately, we cannot help in these conditions here to these people, unfortunately.
Government buildings have been evacuated, yet the impression is that neither the government nor the opposition is in control of the situation.
I would be very frank that the government doesn't control the riot police, and it's very difficult for the opposition to control Maidan, and there are a number of forces who are uncontrolled. So this is the truth. Ukraine is in a big mess.
On Thursday, foreign affairs ministers from France, Germany and Poland met with President Yanukovych. Possible EU sanctions against the country are likely to be discussed, including a ban on the sale of arms and other equipment that could be used to repress demonstrators.
The government has admitted responsibility for a controversial program that saw the forced migration of thousands of children from the Indian Ocean island of Reunion. The children were brought to France to repopulate rural areas but were handed to wealthy locals who are accused of maltreating them. As we hear in the CFI report, the French government has refused financial compensation to the victims.